is a big item, is available. We also have Todd Davidson, our elections manager, on the phone. As you're aware, there's a lot of federal legislation happening right now around the elections front and some cleanup bills at the state level. So Todd's available to answer any questions around those. And then I have not everybody on my screen, but Jennifer Hoffman, our city manager, will also be joining to help with any questions as well. And so before we open it up and just kind of start conversing, I did want to provide just a quick update to everybody. On Tuesday night, I talked about the long bill. It was introduced Tuesday right as we got into the council meeting, as you are all aware. And I don't know if you've been tracking it, but yesterday was a very eventful and exciting day for the long bill, probably more than I've ever seen on a long bill in many, many years. As you're aware, we saw a tremendous budget cut last year with COVID, and then this year it's been kind of classified as a spending spree yesterday with several amendments on the floor. So typically we don't see that in the Senate. We don't see a lot of amendments, and we did see a bunch of those yesterday, and it is on the schedule today for final reading, and then it will move to the House. So just a quick update on that one. It's moving and very exciting if you have some time to follow it. It's looking different than what we've seen in past years. So with that, I'll just open it up for conversation.
Are there any awkward moment? Are there any kind of specific questions? So I have a good overview of the long bill, or would you prefer to start with some of the bills that Danae had introduced and kind of gone over briefly on Tuesday night? We can certainly start there. Whatever the preference is.
I'd like to hear more about the long bill if possible.
Sure. So I think a couple of different things, and one that's making it a little more complex this year is that Colorado has received big chunks of change, right, from all of the COVID-related bills. So the issue is the 2021-22 fiscal year got a whole lot bigger than anyone had planned for, structurally or kind of in the door and out the door. So at $34 billion, it's close to about $4 billion fatter than what the state was spending in 2020, 2021. So the long bill, so overall, so it goes into effect on July 1st. Budget committee works its way through. There's 6 of them. It's bipartisan. It's most powerful committee. People work hard to get on the JBC, and then they're constantly lobbied. So in order to make the long bill conversation happen, there's committee meeting after committee meeting. So every department comes, council presents what they think should and should not happen with regards to funding. And then the departments present their case to be able to say, here's why it's the justification process. They mix all of that together. No one's ever happy at the end of it. One of the biggest chunks of the budget every year is HCPF, interestingly enough. So, and the reason that is primarily because of Medicaid. So Colorado splits the cost for healthcare programming for adult, for low income adults with the federal government. DC's kicking in more this year at 56% instead of 50%. But that's generally why because for us, we see HCPF and we think CDPHE and vaccinations, and really the biggest part of that budget is always Medicaid. Department of Education, K through 12, interestingly enough as well, always sees more discretionary spending from the general fund. It's about 5.8 million this year. So it's 480 from the legislature, and then another $1 billion coming from the Biden administration. So it makes the long bill a little more difficult to follow and understand this year because the budgets are combined between general fund dollars from the state, and then Biden's funding and what that distribution looks like, which is much more prescriptive. So tracking these federal dollars it's going to be fascinating how states are able to maneuver through that. So they're planning for more per pupil spending than we've been able to do in probably 10 years. So we're adding about $425 for those students with the highest needs, which again doesn't seem like a lot, but for those, particularly those rural schools and the schools that have high population of high needs kids, that's a big bump, something that they haven't seen that before. Higher education. So state-run colleges and universities took almost a 60% hit last year. The recouping that is going to be impossible. But from the cuts from the state, it was about $100 million. So that will be put back in the budget. Human services is up $2.4 billion. To Sharon's question, I'm sure there's almost $1 million for behavioral health services specifically for children in crisis. Again, it doesn't seem like a lot, but it's more than they had before. It'll go quick, so shoring it up is where the key is. $1 million for a media marketing campaign to reach people reaching out for the federal food benefits. I'm sure Sharon's Fish will be on the receiving end of some of that marketing in order to get as many people as possible signed up. I don't know what the percentage is for those folks that are still out, that they haven't been reached, that they are in fact eligible. So here's a big one. We have another meeting this afternoon at 3 on transportation. But like every other state agency, the transportation budget is set to shrink again next year by about 4%, which equates to about $86 million. The reason is that people haven't driven as much this year, and so they didn't pay the gas tax and tolls as often. So that means less money came into the state.
So is our meeting at 1 o'clock or 3 o'clock?
Oh, Pat, I don't know. I just said 3. Is it
Sarah?
1?
Sarah?
It's at 1 o'clock, Mayor.
Okay, sorry about that. 1 o'clock.
I thought I gained 2 hours.
So did I. Not the case, apparently. So Sarah talked briefly on Tuesday night about what some of the bills are. The bill, right? And what it looks like and where it's going. Still a lot of moving and shaking, as nobody has seen the language in that. So we'll see where that goes. But again, it's Biden's administration. There's yet a different stimulus package that will provide millions for shovel-ready transportation projects. They're calling it the landmark transportation funding. So there's a lot of back and forth between transportation is getting it, yet behavioral health and those in need they're really thinking that those stimulus dollars kind of shores those folks up. So we're not going to go through Department of Corrections, although here's another interesting piece. That's almost $1 billion a year that we spend on corrections, and you think that their budget would decrease because there was so much effort in order to get people out of prisons and jails, and that's not the case. So it's averages $90 to $150 a day per prisoner to keep them in. So you think that the smaller population would bring major savings, and the need for fewer correction officers, not the case.
There ought to be a bill prohibiting people from going to jail.
So that's not really funny. We're going to talk about that one next. So
I thought it was funny.
That budget is increasing by about 1% because they have more employees than any other. So again, it's the cost of living, et cetera, et cetera. Judicial Department, they got a about a $34 million bump, which they're going to need every penny because we have a year-long backlog from COVID, and then kind of the residuals from 217, and that kind of gets into what the mayor was saying on Senate Bill 62 that we'll talk about in just a minute. I'm just trying to think about, I'm trying to look at the other highlights here: public safety, labor and employment. So you just, I mean, again, it's if anybody wants a deeper dive on it, let me know, and I'll send you not the link to the government legislation, but the link that has a much deeper dive.
And I think too, Jen, I was going to add, I thought it was really interesting of the amendments that were added in the Senate yesterday and that passed. There were several that were introduced but did not pass. The only ones that did pass were the ones on bipartisan support, of course. But they really tied with council priorities that I wanted to highlight. Just, it was interesting to see. So one was they provided funding for a chief equity officer within the Department of Higher Education. So that was one of the big changes. There was $5 million from the general fund for a domestic abuse program, $2 million for disability benefits. And then Sharon, Councilmember Tessier, I see you on here, there was a $5 million in general fund that will be added to the housing grants budget in the Department of Local Affairs for housing assistance, specifically for undocumented immigrants. So those were just the amendments I wanted to point out that did tie to specifically the DEAI priority and then affordable housing as well.
Thanks, Danae, that's great. Sharon, did you have any specific questions to go into to another layer on any one of those?
No, thank you.
Sure.
I appreciate that. I was, kind of, this is incredible. I mean, this is a new day. This is really.
I had a question, Jennifer. This is Jean.
Sure.
So there seemed like there's a lot of moving parts here. So is the long bill counting kind of their chickens before they're hatched? So is the long bill counting on funding from the American Jobs Act that hasn't passed yet, or what?
So Jean, that's such a great question. And it's one of the pieces that makes this whole process super fascinating. So the answer is yes, they are. And so you have two entities. You have legislative council that are the gatekeepers of the cost, implications, tracking unintended consequences for the legislation that has been passed. Then you have OSPB, which is the Office of State Budget Planning, which is directly under the governor. Every year, and I've been doing this for 20 years now, there has never been a time where those two, and they have the same pots, they have all the same information. They couldn't come out more different on what their anticipated revenue, expenditures, and impacts are. So it's really the JBC every year during this time, and it starts in the summer, quite frankly. So this is a labor-intensive process. So to your point, having those added funds that we've received, yet to receive, anticipating to receive, are all woven into this year's budget. So it's fraught with peril. There's just no doubt about it. So OSPB does a better job of, and I don't mean a better job, because Ledge Council historically is much more accurate for a snapshot. OSPB trending and forecasting, that's where they live. The problem is trending and forecasting hasn't served us well for COVID. So their mindset and structure and skill set of their individuals, when you live in that environment versus a fixed environment, that's why I say it's fraught with peril. So probably a 20% error rate this year is what I'd say, instead of like a 5 to 7%.
Okay, that's interesting. So I'd like to be optimistic with all of this, but then you're saying, yes, we have to wait and see, kind of.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Can I ask about a particular bill status?
Please.
I'm interested in HB 211162, management of plastic products. Fort Collins passed a bag ban last week. How can they do that without this preemption being passed?
Danae, you want to take a shot at that, and then I'll fill in the gaps?
Yeah, I actually had notes somewhere that I just took about this because Councilmember Schaaf had asked about this legislation, so I had a feeling it would pop up today. So I'll just give a quick brief overview of what the legislation is in case you haven't been tracking it. So House Bill 1162 was the management of plastic products. It was introduced on March 3rd. And referred to both the Energy and Environment Committee as well as the Finance Committee. It was amended in both of those committees, and now it's sitting in Appropriations. I will add that CC4CA did take a position on it just earlier this week of support, so we are monitoring that. And essentially what House Bill 1162 does is it repeals the prohibition of local government's ability to ban plastic materials starting July 1st, 2023. And essentially, it also prohibits stores and retail food establishments starting September 1st, 2022 from providing single-use plastic. And essentially, it gives them a 1-year gap to make a transition to recyclable paper bags. And it also implements a 10-cent fee per bag when given to a customer, both in that transition period for those plastic bags until we switch to paper products, and then 10 cents even with the paper products moving forward. In the amended language of the bill right now, the expectation is that the store then has to remit 60% of those collected fees, so 6 cents, right, for every bag, back to the local jurisdiction, which then would be used to promote sustainability programs, recycling, compostables, outreach, education, all of those great things. And so that's where it is right now. Again, like I said, CC4CA has taken a support position. One of the interesting things we always get asked is how this would be enforced. So Guyleen, to your point with Fort Collins and how do we enforce this transition? They did put a steep fine in the current legislation to hold businesses accountable. It is currently written as $500 for the first offense and then $1,000 for each offense after. And that money would again go back to the local jurisdiction to do outreach and sustainability programs moving forward. So that's what House Bill 1162 is intended to do. Like I said, it is still sitting in the Appropriations Committee right now. I did check this morning and it hasn't been scheduled yet, Guyleen, for a hearing date. I would guess it will come once the long bill gets through the House. But it is on our legislative tracker. I did add CC4CA support and we are monitoring that as well.
And I think Devin's on the call. Is CCAT going to be taking a position, Devin, as our governing board representative?
Yeah, I believe that we did take a position of support, but it's a level 2 support, so we'll continue to allow CC4CA to take the lead on this.
Awesome.
And I
go on.
Oh, and just one more thing, if I might. I did request council support of this bill.
I support it. But my question is how did Fort Collins how were they able to enact a ban before this was passed? Because I know, that was one of the deterrents for local municipalities. Does anybody know? Just
Danae, you want me to, Danae, you want to take that or so this is your show. So whenever you need to utilize me as a tool and call me in when most appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say they found some loophole, but I don't know what it is, Guyleen. So I'll let Jen take a stab at that, and I'll do a little research to see if I can find something in the meantime.
So Guyleen, it's not unlike when the urban renewal statute was coming down the pipeline, and people knew that they could operate under, or even Senate Bill 181, right? When people knew that it was coming, that you would be precluded. you hop out in front. So this has been on 3 years now. It's been, they didn't introduce a bill last year, but they did the 2 prior years. And it was all about, and the reason, so when you first hear preemption of it, everybody goes, what do you mean? How could you? Because they want a statewide. They don't want some communities to be able to say, we're going to charge 15 cents. Others say 20, and then where all those funds goes. So this is it was a unilateral for Fort Collins to be able to come out and say, we're going to do it this way. Boulder, we're going to do it this way, right? And so you'll see the difference between 10 cents, 12 cents, 15 cents. Do they put the money back into the paper bags? Does it go back into the marketing? So this bill really does have a sustainable piece to where, unless you get another piece of the legislature that comes in and does a full repeal, that's why they chunked it into individual pieces, so that it's a sustainable process. And part of the outside of this bill, Office of Economic OEDIT, Economic Development. I keep thinking about our economic vitality, but it's the Office of Economic Development for the state. They're going to fund from a nonprofit from the feds, secret shoppers that have an app on their phone. So instead of deploying enforcement folks from a state, they're going to have folks that generally shop from all of the algorithms in those stores to be able to say they're doing what they're supposed to be doing or they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So that kind of gets, that's a pretty, it's a novel, interesting way to be able to not expend state dollars on enforcement components. I have never seen that before until this bill was introduced.
Thank you.
What else? So Danae, do you want to give us an update on Senate Bill 62?
Sure. There's not a big update on Senate Bill 62 from Tuesday. As I mentioned, it was kind of the culminating result of SB 217 and then the backlog in the judicial system and then the changes with COVID leading into 62. There is still steep opposition. It's still sitting in committee. Nothing has been scheduled. I did do some looking this morning with ACLU, since it is a supported bill by them, to see if there was any updates, and I think it's still just sitting in committee. I will add that Senate Bill 182, which was called the School Resource Officers Bill or the School Discipline Bill, it was postponed indefinitely on Wednesday, which we anticipated. And there are mumblings that SB 62 will also be postponed indefinitely. But as of now, it's still just maintaining status quo sitting in the committee.
And I want to say quickly too on that Senate Bill 62. Representative Pete Lee, I've known Pete Lee since I've been down at the Capitol, and he is a remarkably thoughtful, well-versed with all things criminal justice. In fact, right up to me taking this job, I did a lot of work with community corrections, and Pete was always my go-to guy on all things criminal justice. Benavides is somewhat new to the criminal justice game, but the hard and fast, just not being open to amendments is really, it's fraught with peril. And having that hard line approach where the intent could be very positive. So a standalone without 217, without COVID, it would look much different. But it's really it's the culmination of all of those things coming into play, and then the inability to waver at all from what you wanted, right? Because anytime you introduce a piece of legislation, you have that gray line in the sand, right? To where people will attach amendments and have conversations, and you're trying to please a really broad group so you can get it through. And then you have a line where you say, that dilutes our primary purpose. So I'm not willing to go beyond that point. Their line in the sand was kind of like at introduction, right? I mean, they had the first round of amendments and then that was it. They were like, nope, no more to that. So again, from the pieces that are in there, I wouldn't suspect that you'll see something this year, but we may very well see something next year. I want to say something really quickly on that SRO bill.
I don't think they would take it up next year.
I don't think so either, Guyleen. But again, bond reform, right? I mean, bond reform, and the chief and I and Devin and Danae had these conversations that bond reform is needed, it's necessary, it's long overdue. But when you try to fix bond reform in this magnitude of a bill, along with everything else, you miss the bond reform piece. Devin's hands up. So that may have been Devin's doorbell, so we'll wait for him to jump back on. But on the SROs, so if council will remember, we were talking about BVSD.
Thanks. So
Hey, Devin, you're really breaking up.
Quite sure what's going to happen
about
with
every
this
second
bill.
word.
I did find the Boulder City.
Hey, Dev, you have a bad connection. We can't hear you.
City Council on this just this last week. Very interesting.
Hey,
Get out,
Dev,
Devin.
something was really interesting, but we don't know what it was. So there you go. So he'll come back. So just real quick on the SRO, we knew that BVSD was taking under advisement not having SROs in their school any longer. That board passed that. So commencing in January 2022, there won't be school resource officers in BVSD. So that's big. I mean, again, that is something that as we move through, so we sit on a board with BVSD regarding their budget, and some of those contacts we should definitely be. The police department is really saddened by that. And again, the SROs, the folks, so you don't just pick an SRO, right? It's not like in the regular rotation. These are people that establish long-term relationships with these kids, with the teachers, with the administration. They honor and value them. They really become a part of that school family. So that's just a heads up, and it's part of that SRO conversation that as a council, we should really start having that conversation in the summer.
Do you know, have they talked about what would be in place instead of? Can we get a little glimpse of what that might look like?
Sure, and Sharon, to that point, kind of to what Jean was saying before about the, what comes first, right? The chicken or the egg. So let's have some thoughtful, intentional conversations before this sweeping decision is made, so that we can be able to say, okay, what does reemployment look like? So from our co-responder program, is it a behavioral health substance use conversation versus what some folks just think as a law enforcement mentality, which we certainly don't deploy that. I don't know if Boulder or if the other officers do or not, right? But I mean, again, let's have a bigger conversation about not just how to fill that gap, but these officers fill a role as teacher, as therapist, as social worker, which is a lot for them. So I think it could be a really positive conversation and not coming from a place of judgment, but curiosity about how do we help support you be safe? What does that look like? Right.
Okay. Yeah. And I think a lot of that has to do with, just how do we respect our youth, and maybe that PYD piece can come in. And maybe I'll bring it up at the next HSAC meeting too.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a great idea.
I guess what's most disappointing to me is that we don't have a voice, right? And this is our taxpayer money in the Boulder Valley School District, and yet we don't get a voice in what Broomfield residents that go to Broomfield-based schools, completely voiceless here, but yet on the hook for taxes. So there's something wrong with that.
So there's a resident, Pat. Is that what you were going to say?
I've been on a couple committees with the Boulder Valley School District and resigned because they weren't responsive. I think we as a city council have a right to respond back to and try to get their board to listen to us. And I think that's what Jennifer's saying. I also suspect after the King Soopers deal that some of their attitudes may be different. I mean, it was a gut reaction to the Elijah McClain story, and that's why I guess because it's 2022, I didn't feel like we had the time to address it. But sometime what is it? January 1st, 2022. So it's coming up.
Yes.
So so this summer is something we should let them know.
Absolutely.
We pay for the school. We pay for the SRO. For them to say that they're not going to allow it, we need to have a dialogue with them. I suspect they'll have that dialogue where they would not a year ago.
I completely agree. And so let's start with the and Tina Marquez is the gosh, I'm pretty sure she's vice chair. Is thoughtful and reasonable. We've always had a Broomfield resident on that board. It used to be Jean Paxton, and then it went Wendy. Just can't think. Anyway, regardless. Let's start the conversation. Then maybe if Sharon and Guyleen want to start it at HSAC, and then we'll, from the CMO's perspective, we'll do that integrated piece for a bigger conversation with BVSD, June, July-ish. Great.
And I just wanted to add, I guess from my perspective, I want to hear from the Broomfield Police Department.
Sure.
Big on this, because it seems to me if they're used to having that SRO in the school, if something goes wrong, they know exactly who they are communicating with, and they know they're in sync. So now we've got a situation, for better or worse, but we are at the situation where who are they communicating with? And that's where it is us, that are it is Broomfield that has to be reactive in a different way. So we do have to be in the conversation, I would think.
Absolutely. And again, it was the police department, Jean, that again, from an administrative perspective, when we look at it, we say, this is a big issue. But from the police department, not only is it a big issue, but it's an emotional issue, because they've just spent so much time. Again, there's not a lot of turnover from administration in these schools. So it takes a long time to get there, and the relationships are deep. And yeah, our police department will no doubt be at that table.
I also think too, I wonder on top of that, just being a former teacher, just how the teachers feel about that. They are under a lot of pressure already to understand what it's like to have an active shooter drill. I'm wondering how they feel and if they've had that seat at the table. And then on top of that, what does our communication look like? Kind of like, what Councilmember Lynn was saying, was that they are always in sync. Are we patrolling them more in that area? What does their safety plan look like? We do have a school safety officer for Adams 12, and I'm curious as to how that structure changes. And I'll be honest, I really feel like the more you see someone, the more human they are to you, right? So these resource officers are in these schools, really getting to know the kids. I've seen them do a lot of positive things. So, it concerns me that we're starting a little bit more separation and possibly less communication, which is of concern to me. So I would just like to just know what that communication looks like and understand now, who has more responsibility, and where's our responsibility lie. So.
Most definitely. And so part of that conversation is, I foresee the conversation not as, we're okay with this, now we're going to come up with plan B, right? I think the conversation should be, you all are part of our family. You all are part of this police department. How do we make this work? We're open to what the changes and modifications and how do we meet the needs of those that want to get their school resource officer out. Is it the uniform? What is it, right? So just having a really thoughtful conversation about how do we continue the relationship where it's best for everybody and it makes for a safe, comfortable environment. So we don't know what we don't know yet, and that will be part of the conversation as we start moving forward in the summer. Did Devin get back on, or I don't see him? Am I missing him? No?
Yeah, I did. I called in. Can you hear me any better?
Much better. You got to start from the beginning though, Dee, because.
So I jumped back on it. It sounds like we're talking about a different subject though, so I don't want to drag us backwards in terms of time. So.
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay. Well, I what I wanted to say on Senate Bill 62 is I checked in with the Boulder City Council conversation. And it was very interesting. As we know, Boulder was one of the first jurisdictions out of the gate to oppose Senate Bill 62. And there has been a lot of conversation in that community. They took this up as part of their conversation this last week. And they ended up coming basically with an amend position on Senate Bill 62, which is very different than the opposition position that they had before that. So I'm interested to see kind of what the traction continues to look like on Senate Bill 62, if there will be some serious conversations on possible amendments. But I look at it and I say there's a lot of opportunity there to have some serious conversations, as you and Chief Krieger and I had a conversation a couple weeks ago. I think that there's a lot of good things that can come out of this bill, but there's got to be a willingness there with the state legislature to really want to do something as opposed to do nothing, because that's the other alternative at this point.
Yeah. Hey, Danae, that's a great question, because I saw that too. There's a big, there's a little difference between opposing and being in favor of with huge amendments. And that's where the Metro Mayor's Caucus went, was they went ahead and went opposed because the amendments were so huge. So I didn't read the details of exactly what Boulder approved, but going back to Devin's comment, there were amendments on it, and I'm curious how significant those amendments were.
Danae, you want me to take that one?
Sure, if you want to jump in.
They were significant.
That's what.
Yeah.
The sponsors are not open to that. So again, it gets back to the.
So they just took a different approach.
They did. Yeah. And so Pat, generally it's, again, it's opposed unless amended, because you never have support unless amended, right? That's a moot point. So generally, no one's ever going to be flat opposed
Well, but this is
unless
support if amendment.
ideologically.
Yeah, yeah,
But
right.
generally on this one, because again, bond reform, that piece, if you could pull out that piece, but it's the tentacles are so tied to all of the other pieces. So
Well,
so what I was saying before about that line in the sand, where sponsors say, if you cross this line, then it dilutes the bill to the point of, which is our hands are up. So we'll continue to track it for sure. What else?
I did see that Sharon had commented for an update on 173 in the chat, and Sharon, that is actually scheduled for the Senate today. And I just checked, I don't think they've got to it in their order yet. It was laid over on the 6th and laid over again yesterday. They just didn't get to it, but it is on review for the whole Senate today, and hopefully then it will come back for a third and final reading and move to the House.
Danae, you want to tell
And just
everybody what 173 is?
I just realized right when I finished. So Senate Bill 173 was the rights in the residential lease agreements. And so it's to provide a little bit of flexibility between eviction and still working with the renter until a judicial order is actually issued. And Sharon, I know you've been active with that one as well.
Thank you.
And then Devin, did you want to talk about the 1125, the firework bill that's the other one that Devin's going to ask for council's support during the next update?
I believe it's 1235.
Okay.
I testified on that one with Steve Odorizio too.
And I can provide a quick update on that, Devin. So House Bill 1235, which is the fireworks regulation bill. So the goal is to improve public safety by implementing stricter regulations on what you can sell based off of your license and who you can sell to in regards to fireworks. And it did pass the House yesterday with no amendments. So it will move on to the Senate, the second chamber. As of today, it still has not been scheduled, but it did pass the House. And with no amendments in committee or as the whole of the committee of the whole.
And then I asked staff to follow HB 21-1075, which is replace the term illegal alien. So it's in the state specifications for contracts. It would replace the term illegal alien with worker without authorization as it relates to public contracts for services. So every time I have read a contract in Broomfield, I cringe when I read illegal alien. So because I researched Boulder had changed their language and things, but then I asked, and I was told that our language is in sync with the state. And so if the state passes this bill to change its language, its contract language, then that would enable us to have the opportunity to consider doing the same replacement of terms in our contracts. That's the way I understand it.
Councilmember Lim, that is correct, and it did pass. It's on the governor's desk awaiting signature, and we anticipate that will be signed pretty quickly.
So would our council need to do anything to speed up? Can we make sure our language, I think this is huge. Can we get our language in sync before? Can we do it now? Does council need to do something? How does that work?
Sharon, if I can follow up with you all, that would be great. Nancy Rogers and Jennifer and I have been having preliminary conversations in anticipation of this bill passing, and when Jean brought it to our attention. So I know it's on radars. I need to look back at when the effective date of the bill is, and not saying that we need to wait until then, but let me just confirm with our legal team of what that looks like in that transition, and then I can provide an update to all of council. I'll try for next Tuesday.
Awesome. And thanks,
Commissioner,
Jean, for bringing this forward.
Part of that conversation, usually it's July when bills take effect, either upon signature or July. This one is July, but when we did our, when we did our audit for HR and payroll for the federal equity fair pay, I'm just trying to think of I know the acronym, but anyway, it identified many of those places that we have in the ordinance, in the charter, in general language, in our applications. So not just in the contracting piece. So they identified that, geez, with that audit a couple of months ago. So I don't want to say it'll be immediate, but it'll be swift.
Thank you.
Todd, how are things in the election world?
No, you're good to talk.
There's not much change in the election bills. There's a lot of movement on the federal bill, the For the People Act, which is currently in the Senate, and it is being probably heavily amended. There's some really great things about the For the People Act, but it also does take Colorado back a few steps in certain ways. So the Secretary's team is trying to work with the Colorado delegation to make sure that Colorado voters are not taken back when For the People Act probably will pass in some form or another. (1071), the ranked choice voting bill, is still in House Appropriations, and we think it probably won't move out of House Appropriations until after the big bill is finalized and considered.
Can you go into any detail about how it would set Colorado back? Kind of a top level concern?
Sure. The biggest issue would be the timeline. For the People Act requires a 10-day cure period and would take us from a ballot in hand state, meaning that we had to have your ballot by 7 p.m., to accepting postmarks up to 10 days after the election. And it's interesting when you look at the data from Washington State, who is a postmark state with 7 days acceptance, and Colorado, the number of ballots that are received but not counted and therefore disenfranchised because they were late. Colorado last year had around 7,000 ballots that were not counted because they were late. Washington State had 17,000 ballots that were counted because either they came in and they were not postmarked after the election, or they came in long after the 7-day period. So our delegation is working very hard on that issue. We would like to stay a ballot in hand state. Some of the other issues that would be difficult for Colorado, or certainly expensive, is that all vote centers would have to be open for 15 days, including Saturdays and Sundays, for 10 hours a day. So that would be much more expensive for us to equip and to staff with judges. Most of the other things in the bill are either where Colorado are, or it would bring us a little bit forward. Colorado already does, for example, automatic voter registration, but this would allow us to add a number of government resources to add more information coming in for automatic voter registration. The Secretary's office does believe that it will pass in some form or another, especially in light of the new legislation in Florida and Georgia.
Well, could it be more of a floor then? I mean, if we want to enhance this, I mean, is it going to hamstring us, well, we're already way ahead of everybody else, right? So, I mean, couldn't there be a stopgap to where if states like Colorado are already going above and beyond, couldn't they continue?
That is definitely a possibility that many of the election officials, not just from Colorado, but across the nation, are pushing for. Certainly Washington, Oregon, California are also interested in not taking steps back. So creating a floor rather than a ceiling would be very helpful. I just lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry. But yeah.
So Todd, help me out here. Without getting rid of the filibuster, you think that this will become legislation? I guess I always thought that they couldn't be done through reconciliation. Will they get 60 votes?
They do have a second bill which they could push through on reconciliation, and most consensus believes that it will be the For the People Act in one form or the other. They pushed 4 years ago, or not 4 years ago, but in Obama's first term, they certainly pushed healthcare, and their second thought was voting rights. And now that they have both houses, our lobbyists and the state's lobbyists really believe that they will push this through on reconciliation.
Yeah, I guess I'll be interested to see how they do that. So
this would this override the crazy draconian suppression laws that states like Georgia are passing and Texas?
It would go beyond overriding those laws. It would reset their laws, and it would reset the laws of much of the United States that is not currently, that does not have a voter-centric election model. I'll say that. It would create at least minimums that all states would have to meet, and it would eliminate states from enacting, as it is now, it would eliminate states from enacting extra regulations, providing more stringent, for example, voter ID. It would prevent states from increasing that and a few other things. We have seen quite a bit of change from the House version of the bill to the Senate version of the bill, and we anticipate that most of the amendment action will happen in the Senate before it goes back to House.
So I was just reading what Manchin said yesterday, and so I'm trying to reconcile this to what where Manchin drew the line, and I don't think he meant to be nuanced, but we'll all follow this with fascination, right?
Very much so.
So interesting.
That's this is a great example of, and as whether this is a popular thing to say or not, this is the pendulum reacting to the pendulum, which then the pendulum will react to the pendulum again, and then we'll continue to have these sweeping responses. That's it. No opinion, just
That makes sense.
Yeah. I'm gonna go have lunch.
All right.
Well, this was great info. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, this was good. Thank you,
So
Danae.
we'll just stay. We'll just keep this.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, does this time just work for everybody if we just keep the same time moving forward?
I may or may not be able to. It just depends on the day. Today I was able to, but it's totally fine. I think I was pleasantly surprised to see so many of us.
But you're
here.
taping this though, so and
Yeah. I was just going to say they'll be recorded and posted to the website, Sharon. So if you're not able to join in the future, and then I'll update that in the CMO weekly update that goes out today, so everybody has those links as well.
Yeah, that's perfect, because that's how I'm able to watch the COVID updates. So because they're recorded, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Everybody have a wonderful weekend.
I'm sure we'll talk before. But I appreciate this. Thanks, y'all.
Great.
We'll see you at 1 o'clock, right, for the transportation. I thought was 3.
Yeah, not done yet. That's
Gina,
good.
we're sending out the document right now.
Okay, cool.
For the
Talk to y'all
answers.
later.
For the answers, Jean, for you and Devin on baseline. Okay.
Thanks.
See you, everybody.
Bye.